When I closed my driveway to protect my kids, Karen wasn't having any of it. She quickly escalated the situation by calling the police and rallying the HOA against me. Can I overcome her relentless attacks and restore peace to my neighborhood? Welcome to our channel. Please subscribe if you want more HOA stories. I never thought closing my driveway would cause such a big problem. It was a warm Saturday morning in early spring, and I was watching my two kids play in the yard. They had been trying to get their bikes out for weeks, but accidents kept happening. A close call here, a scrape there. It was enough to make me decide to close the driveway for their safety. I grabbed my phone and found a simple lock for the gate. This will keep them safe, I thought, feeling good about my decision. I spent the morning installing the lock, making sure everything was secure. By noon, the driveway was closed, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But my peace didn't last long. Just as I was enjoying a cup of coffee on the porch, Karen, my next-door neighbor, stormed over. Karen was known around the neighborhood as the type who always had something to complain about. She had a sharp voice and an even sharper glare that made everyone uneasy. "You can't do that," Karen shouted, pointing angrily at the closed driveway. Her face was red with frustration. "This is against the HOA rules. You need to open it right now." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Karen, I did this for the kids' safety. I checked the HOA guidelines and I thought I was following them." Karen wasn't having it. "I'm calling the police," she declared, pulling out her phone and dialing quickly. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air. Police officers arrived and Karen made a scene, insisting that I was violating the community rules. The officers listened politely as Karen explained the situation. When they spoke to me, I showed them the lock and explained my reasons. They looked at Karen, then back at me, confused. After a few minutes, they decided there was no immediate issue and left. Karen stormed back to her house, muttering under her breath. Later that day, I received a letter from the HOA. My heart sank as I read it. A fine for closing my driveway without proper approval. I couldn't believe it. What started as a simple decision to protect my children was now turning into a legal battle. That evening, I sat down with my laptop, determined to fight the fine. I began researching HOA rules, property maps, and local laws. I found that I had followed the guidelines correctly, and that Karen had no right to call the police over something like this. My confidence grew as I gathered evidence to support my case. But Karen wasn't done yet. The next morning, I noticed my mailbox had been trashed, with letters spilling out onto the ground. Scrawled on my door were threatening notes telling me to remove the lock or face more fines. It was clear that Karen was trying to intimidate me into giving up. Feeling overwhelmed, I reached out to a few friendly neighbors to see if they had experienced similar issues with Karen. To my surprise, several of them shared stories about her constant complaints and how she always seemed to get her way with the HOA. It seemed Karen had been building her power in the community for a long time. One neighbor mentioned that Karen had a history of turning small issues into big problems, always keeping the HOA board on her side. This made me realize that my fight was not just about a closed driveway. It was about standing up against someone who abused her influence. Determined to take back control, I decided to document everything. I took pictures of the lock, saved all the letters, and kept records of my conversations with Karen and the HOA. I even reached out to a local news station, hoping to bring some attention to the unfair treatment I was receiving. As days turned into weeks, the situation only got worse. Karen continued to find new ways to harass me, and the HOA started sending more fines. My once peaceful home became a battleground, and the stress was taking a toll on my family. One night, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I received an anonymous tip. Someone told me that the HOA meetings weren't as fair as they seemed, and that decisions were being manipulated behind closed doors. My curiosity was piqued. Could there be more to this story than just Karen's complaint? The next morning, I decided to attend an HOA meeting to see for myself what was really happening. I walked into the community center, feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. The room was filled with neighbors, and at the front sat the HOA board members, including Karen, who looked as stern as ever. As I took my seat, I could feel everyone's eyes on me. The meeting started, and Karen wasted no time bringing up my closed driveway again. "This is a clear violation," she insisted, her voice cutting through the room. I stood up to respond, presenting all the evidence I had gathered. I showed the property maps, explained the safety reasons, and even shared some of the supportive messages from other neighbors. But instead of listening, some members of the HOA nodded in agreement with Karen, while others looked uncomfortable. I could see the tension rising in the room, and I knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger fight. As the meeting wrapped up, I felt a mix of hope and uncertainty. I had taken the first step, but I knew Karen and the HOA wouldn't let this go easily. As I walked out, my phone buzzed with a new message, an invitation to a secret meeting where important decisions were being made. I realized that to win this battle, I would need to dig deeper and uncover the truth behind the HOA's actions. The road ahead was unclear, but I was determined to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. The moment I stepped into the HOA meeting, I felt the tension thick in the air. Everyone's eyes were on me, and Karen sat at the front with a smug smile. I took a deep breath, ready to stand my ground. "I'm here to discuss the fine," I began calmly. Karen immediately interrupted. "This is ridiculous. You're blocking the driveway and causing problems for everyone." Her voice was sharp, and I could see some neighbors nodding in agreement. I knew I had to stay calm. "I understand your concerns, Karen," I replied. "But I have documentation showing that closing the driveway is within my rights." I reached into my bag and pulled out the property maps and the city's regulations I had researched. Karen rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed. "Those are outdated," she snapped. I felt a surge of determination. I had spent weeks gathering every piece of information to support my case. As I presented my findings, I noticed a few neighbors starting to pay attention. One of them, Mr. Thompson, raised his hand. "I didn't realize there were changes to the regulations," he said thoughtfully. This gave me hope. I continued explaining how the new rules supported my decision to close the driveway for safety reasons. Karen tried to counter each point, but my research was thorough. After the meeting, I went home feeling a bit hopeful. But that night, my mailbox was a disaster. Bills and junk mail were scattered everywhere, and among them was a threatening note. "Stop pushing your agenda or face the consequences." My heart raced. Was Karen escalating things? The next day, I noticed strange noises coming from my garage. When I looked outside, my driveway was padlocked, preventing anyone from using it. I refused to give up. The next morning, I visited the local library to dive deeper into property laws. I found articles and old meeting minutes that hinted at Karen's long history of complaints and her influence within the HOA. It seemed she had been using her position to control things her way for years. Armed with this new information, I felt more confident. I decided to reach out to some of my neighbors privately. I knocked on Mrs. Lopez's door first. "Hi, Mrs. Lopez." I greeted her warmly. "I wanted to talk about the driveway issue. I think Karen might be unfairly targeting me." She looked concerned. "I've noticed her being very strict lately. Maybe we can work together to find a solution." Encouraged by her response, I spoke to a few more neighbors. Gradually, I started to build a small group of supporters. One evening, while organizing my notes, I received a call from an anonymous source. "Meet me at the park tomorrow at noon," the voice whispered. My curiosity was piqued. Could this person have information that would help my case? The next day, I went to the park, feeling a mix of anxiety and hope. A woman approached me, her face partially hidden by a hat. "I have something you need to know about Karen," she said quietly. She handed me a folder filled with emails and memos showing how Karen had been manipulating HOA decisions for her benefit. "This will expose her," she assured me before quickly leaving. Back home, I reviewed the documents. They clearly showed Karen pressuring the HOA board to approve fines against anyone who didn't comply with her demands. With this evidence, I felt ready to take the next step. I decided to bring everything to light at the upcoming HOA meeting. I printed copies of the documents and prepared a presentation to show the board members and my neighbors. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how far this conflict had escalated. My driveway was padlocked, my neighbors were turning against me, and Karen was more determined than ever to win. But I knew I had the truth on my side. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to see this through. At the HOA meeting, the room was packed. Karen looked more confident than ever, but I felt a sense of calm. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and began. I have new evidence that shows Karen has been unfairly targeting me and others. I handed out the documents and explained everything I had discovered. The room fell silent as people read through the emails and memos. Gasps and whispers spread among the neighbors. Karen tried to defend herself, but the evidence was overwhelming. One board member stood up. I had no idea Karen was using her position this way. We need to investigate these claims. The tension was palpable. Some neighbors looked ashamed for supporting Karen without knowing the full story. I felt a wave of relief mixed with nervousness. Just as it seemed things were turning in my favor, the lights flickered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and a few people murmured nervously. When the lights came back on, the atmosphere had shifted again. Karen was nowhere to be seen, and the board members looked uneasy. We need to adjourn this meeting until we can fully review the evidence, one of them said. Feeling frustrated but not defeated, I knew this was just a temporary setback. I left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose. I decided to reach out to the local news station, hoping to get some media attention on the unfair treatment I was facing. To my surprise, they were interested in my story. A reporter scheduled an interview for the next day, giving me a platform to share my side of the conflict. The interview was nerve-wracking but empowering. I explained how Karen's actions had affected me and other neighbors, showing the documents as proof. The story quickly gained attention in the community, and more people started to see the truth behind Karen's behavior. Support poured in from unexpected places, and the pressure on the HOA board grew. As the days passed, the board began to take action. They formed a committee to investigate the claims against Karen and promised to implement new measures to prevent such abuses of power in the future. Karen's influence waned as more of her tactics were exposed. Slowly, the neighborhood started to come together again, rebuilding the trust that had been lost. One evening, as I was unlocking my driveway, I noticed Karen watching me from her window. Instead of anger, there was a hint of resignation in her eyes. I felt a sense of closure. The journey had been tough, but standing up for what was right had made a difference. The community was stronger now, united against unfair treatment, and I felt proud of the change we had achieved together. The night was quiet, but inside me a storm was brewing. I couldn't let Karen win. My driveway was locked, and my heart felt heavy. I knew I had to take action. The next morning I woke up early, determined to fix things. I grabbed my laptop and started researching HOA rules. There had to be a way to fight the fine and reopen my driveway. As I dug deeper, I found the property maps showing that my driveway was entirely on my property. This was a big clue. I printed the maps and highlighted the sections that proved I was within my rights. Feeling more confident, I decided to visit the local library to learn about property laws. The librarian was kind and helped me find the books I needed. I spent hours reading, taking notes, and understanding the legal terms. With my research in hand, I knew my next step was to gather support. I reached out to my neighbors who had also felt bothered by Karen's constant complaints. Many of them had their own issues with the HOA and Karen's favoritism. We met at my house and shared our stories. Together, we realized we were stronger as a group. We decided to present our case at the next HOA meeting together. The day of the meeting arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and hope as we entered the meeting room. Karen was already there, looking as angry as ever. The HOA board members sat at the front, some looking unsure. I stood up and began to speak calmly. We've come together because we believe the recent actions against us are unfair. We have evidence that shows my driveway is on my property, and Karen's complaints have been unjustified. I showed the property maps and explained the laws I had learned. One by one, my neighbors shared their own experiences with Karen and the HOA. The room was filled with stories of favoritism and unreasonable fines. Karen tried to interrupt, but we stayed focused and presented our evidence clearly. Just when it seemed like we were making progress, Karen stood up and shouted, "This is all a misunderstanding. I was just trying to keep our community safe." The tension in the room was thick, but then one of the board members looked at the maps and nodded. "It appears there might have been some mistakes in our records," he admitted. Before the meeting could end, another surprise came. A local news reporter who had been quietly observing approached us. "I'd like to cover this story," she said. "It's important for the community to see what's happening here." Suddenly, our fight wasn't just within the HOA anymore. The media attention put pressure on the board to act fairly. After the meeting, the board called another session to review our case, this time with the reporter present. They couldn't ignore the evidence. In the public interest, they decided to dissolve the current HOA committee and promised to hold fair elections for new members. Karen was removed from her position, and the new board agreed to revoke all the fines against us. As the news spread, more neighbors felt encouraged to speak up about their own issues. The community started to come together, realizing that unity was their strength. My driveway was finally reopened, and the fines were taken back. I felt a wave of relief and pride. We had turned a difficult situation into a positive change for everyone. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, we discovered that some of the old board members were planning to form a new committee to regain control. This time we were ready. We organized meetings, continued to gather evidence, and kept the media involved. Our community was stronger than ever, and we knew that together, we could handle whatever came next. Looking back, I realized how important it was to stay calm and determined. By using research, legal knowledge, and the power of community, we overcame the challenges Karen and the HOA had thrown at us. It wasn't easy, but standing up for what was right made our neighborhood a better place for everyone. And every time I drive down my driveway, I'm reminded that courage and unity can truly make a difference. The peace we thought we had was shattered the next morning. I woke up to find a sign taped to my door. HOA is watching you. My heart raced. I had just thought we were done with Karen and the HOA's trouble. What was happening now? I took a deep breath and called my friend Mia, who knew a lot about local laws. Mia, something's wrong. Karen left that sign on my door. What should I do? She replied calmly. Stay calm and gather all the evidence. We need to protect ourselves. I remembered the property maps I had studied during the fight. They showed that my driveway was indeed mine to close for safety. I went to the library and printed copies to show at the next HOA meeting. As I left, I noticed Karen watching me from across the street, her face full of anger. I stayed focused, knowing I had the truth on my side. At the next HOA meeting, I stood up confidently. I have proof that my driveway closure is legal and for the safety of my family, I said, holding up the maps. The room was silent as everyone looked at the maps. Karen tried to interrupt. This is just a misunderstanding, she blurted out. But the maps were clear. Suddenly, the media arrived. A local reporter had heard about our story and wanted to cover the meeting. The cameras rolled as I continued. We deserve to live peacefully without harassment. It's not just about my driveway. It's about our community's right to safety and respect. Karen's allies in the HOA looked uneasy under the spotlight. I could see some neighbors nodding in agreement, realizing they had been wrong to follow Karen blindly. The reporter asked questions and I answered honestly, sharing our journey from the first complaint to our united stand. After the meeting, I received support from unexpected places. Neighbors who had been quiet before came forward with their own stories of Karen's overbearing behavior. Together, we showed that Karen's power was not as strong as we thought. The HOA board decided to hold a vote on removing Karen from any position of authority. But Karen wasn't ready to give up. That night, I found my mailbox broken and more threatening notes. Fear started to creep in, but I remembered Mia's words to stay calm. I reached out to the community again, organizing a neighborhood watch to ensure everyone felt safe and supported. We decided to use social media to share our story, posting about our experiences and the evidence we had gathered. We gained more support from people outside our neighborhood. The pressure on the HOA grew, and more members began to question Karen's intentions. One evening, as I was working on our next steps, there was a loud knock on my door. It was Karen. She looked desperate. "You think you can take everything from me?" she shouted. I stayed calm. "We're just fighting for what's right. Let's find a peaceful solution." But Karen wasn't interested in peace. She threatened to take legal action, claiming my driveway closure was illegal. I knew this was her last attempt to regain control. I had to be ready. With Mia's help, I researched the local laws again and found a clause that fully supported my right to close the driveway for safety reasons. We filed a formal response, attaching all our evidence and the support from the community. The case was set for a hearing and I felt prepared. The day of the hearing, the room was packed with neighbors and some media. Karen entered, looking defeated but still defiant. The judge listened as I presented our case, showing the property maps, legal clauses, and community support. Karen tried to argue, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge ruled in our favor, confirming that my driveway closure was legal and that Karen had acted unfairly. Relief washed over me as the hearing concluded. The community had stood together, and justice was served. Karen was ordered to remove the signs and stop any further harassment. The HOA had to restructure to prevent such abuse of power in the future. In the weeks that followed, our neighborhood felt different. We were more connected, supporting each other and ensuring that everyone's voice was heard. My driveway remained closed, and the safety of my children was secure. We had turned a conflict into a stronger, united community. One evening, as I watched my kids play safely in the yard, I realized how far we had come. What started as a simple decision to protect my family had brought us all closer together. The challenges we faced taught us the importance of standing up for what's right and the power of community. Looking back, I knew that our victory was not just mine but ours. We had shown that even when faced with an overbearing antagonist like Karen, determination, unity, and truth could prevail. As the sun set, I felt hopeful for the future, knowing that we had built a neighborhood based on respect and cooperation.